Well, good afternoon. Mike Benner, Public Information Manager for the Portland Police Bureau. Obviously, a lot of questions over the last few days. I appreciate those, and I also appreciate the patience as we let our investigators and detectives investigate what happened early Saturday morning at the Multnomah Athletic Club. This afternoon, I can tell you that the man killed in that incident has been positively identified as Bruce Valentine Whitman, a 49-year-old who resided in Portland. His family has been notified of his death. The medical examiner will determine cause and manner of death, and those results will be available after toxicology is complete. Unfortunately, I don't have a timeline for how long that'll take, but of course, you can feel free to check back with us, and we'll do our best to get you those answers when we can. It has been widely reported by some in the room of Mr. Whitman's contact with the Portland Police Bureau's Behavioral Health Unit. We have a sergeant here from BHU to provide some remarks, but first I want to turn it over to Chief Day for some remarks. Chief?
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. Once again, thanks everyone for their patience as we've really been focused on this over the course of the weekend to be able to get you accurate information. I want to start by thanking once again the numerous partners, certainly the Portland Police Bureau and the men and women that just answered the call and helped process a really difficult scene, but we were supported in that by a lot of different folks. Portland Fire and Rescue obviously were there hand in glove with us at the beginning and stood by while we continue to do the dangerous work around that. Our Metropolitan Explosive Disposal Unit, which is made up from partners from Vancouver PD, Clackamas County Sheriff's Office, Gresham PD, Port of Portland, and the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. Appreciate them. That was an incredibly long day, and Sergeant Dufresne mentioned in his 13 years leading this unit, probably the most complex scene that we've faced. We had 2 explosive detection canines come in from TriMet, thanks to our TriMet partners, their support. Medical Examiner's Office, of course, ATF, the FBI Evidence Response Team joined us in helping process the scene, and also Suburban Propane, their expertise as we dealt with the propane tanks and so forth is much appreciated, which just really exemplifies how this has been a complete effort. As I mentioned on Saturday, we can be proud of our public safety system here in Portland, but really as a region. On Saturday, I mentioned and really value the sanctity of life and the loss of life and highlighting the tragedy, but also want to recognize over the last couple of days the conversations that I've had and information and awareness we've gained over the behavior of Mr. Whitman over the last several years and the significant impact that has had specifically on members of the Multnomah Athletic Club. And our hearts go out to them. We know that that this has been a challenging time for them, not only this weekend, but maybe some of their interactions with Mr. Whitman ahead of that. And we're sensitive to the fact that there's a lot here for our community to take in, and specifically for those that belong to the athletic club. And so we've appreciated the partnership we've shared with them. They've been very supportive and very cooperative in working with us. But I want to highlight that these events we know don't happen in a vacuum, and that they impact all of us in certain ways and can really challenge our sense of safety. I want to assure Portlanders that we are confident that this was an isolated incident, as we mentioned before, and that you really have some of the best hard at work trying to resolve this, and then also continue to provide that high level of safety for everyone. With that, I'll turn it over to Sergeant Silverman. He's a sergeant from our Behavioral Health Unit. He can give kind of a brief overview of our history with Mr. Whitman. Thanks.
All right. So my name is Josh Silverman. I'm a sergeant in the Behavioral Health Unit, and Mr. Whitman did have quite a bit of contact with our team over the years, and so I've been asked to do a quick overview of what my team is, as well as a summary of his contacts with my team. So Behavioral Health Unit, or BHU, the heart of it is really we have 5 officer-clinician duos who go out and respond to referrals from patrol. So basically, patrol officers, they'll interact with somebody in the community, and if it looks like that police contact was generated in part because of some sort of significant mental illness, they'll send a referral to my team. I'll triage the cases and primarily assign cases where somebody poses some sort of significant dangerousness in the community, or as having frequent negative police contacts. And those teams, those officer-clinician duos, they'll go out and they have basically all the tools at their disposal of both law enforcement and a mental health clinician. And so the idea would be to do something proactive to try to prevent some sort of tragedy in the future. So really that comes down to kind of sort of three buckets. It would be sort of community-based stuff related to connecting somebody to community-based services, or even things like working with their landlord to keep them from becoming homeless, or connecting them to OHP, or sort of community-based stuff. If somebody's decompensated so much so that they really need to go to the hospital to get stabilized, we might go through the civil commitment process. And then for some rare cases where people are committing a lot of higher level crimes, we might arrest them and then work with the district attorney's office in the aid and assist process to try to get them help while in custody. So that's kind of a brief overview of what my team does. Again, it's 5 partnerships, so 5 officer-clinician teams that go out. That's kind of the heart of BHU. So Bruce Whitman was on our radar. He was referred back in 2021. I've written up a little summary of his contacts with BHU. So I am going to read this out just to make sure I don't misspeak over these details. Here we go. Our BHU team first engaged with Mr. Whitman in 2021 after neighbors reported alarming behavior and Mr. Whitman in possession of a firearm. A stalking order was granted, but a firearms prohibition was not granted by the judge. Between 2021 and June of 2022, we were made aware of multiple incidents, including protesting in front of the Multnomah Athletic Club and harassing of community members. BHU made multiple outreach efforts to reduce their harassment and to connect Mr. Whitman with mental health services. And although he did agree to speak with us on a few occasions, he was not receptive to our efforts to refer him to mental health services. Our team also coordinated with family members, neighbors, members of the MAC, and other parties affected by Mr. Whitman's declining mental health, with a goal of mitigating safety concerns and getting him connected to appropriate care. Although his behavior was concerning, it did not meet the legal threshold for criminal enforcement at the time. But by June of 2022, Mr. Whitman's behavior met the threshold for a peace officer hold. Our team utilized Oregon's involuntary commitment process to have him evaluated and temporarily held for mental health treatment. He was released less than 2 weeks later. That same month, BHU successfully petitioned for an extreme risk protection order, sometimes called a red flag law. It was granted for 1 year, and with family cooperation, a firearm was removed to reduce immediate risk. BHU also coordinated with the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office to explore potential legal options, although no charges were pursued at the time. In February of 2026, following a significant mental health crisis, Mr. Whitman was taken to the hospital for both physical and mental health issues. He was released a few weeks later and was connected to a county mental health team. BHU obtained another extreme risk protection order, resulting in the seizure of an additional firearm. Throughout all of these contexts, BHU tenaciously used the tools available to them under Oregon law, including outreach, coordination with partners, civil commitment processes, and court-ordered firearm restrictions. Despite these efforts, Mr. Whitman continued to struggle with significant, serious behavioral health challenges, and he did not consistently engage in ongoing treatment. This is a difficult case that underscores both the dedication of our behavioral health unit and the limitations of the current system when someone is unwilling or unable to maintain long-term engagement with services. Thank you.
Thank you to Sergeant Silverman, obviously making it very clear that the Portland Police Bureau's behavioral health unit did everything they could to help this individual. That said, our thoughts go out to him and his family, as well as anyone who had any sort of interaction with him, whether that be negative or positive. We can open up to questions. All of the folks behind me have somewhere to get, so we can't be here too long. I will also add that we have Commander Crooker in the room as well. He might be able to speak to any questions related to any of the search warrants that were executed following the incident at the MAC. And we also have Sergeant Dufresne here, who's on the Metropolitan Explosive Disposal Unit, and can maybe speak to any follow-up questions regarding the explosives found at the building. With that, we'll open it up. Please identify yourself and who the question's for. McKenna, we'll start with you.
Question for Sergeant Silverman. I'm curious if you can explain released after that 2-week hold in February?
Yeah, so the civil commitment process, it's a bit of a baton handoff. And so the way it works is if somebody meets our threshold for a peace officer hold, that gives us the authority to detain the person and to have them transported to a hospital. From there, the decision on whether or not the person's going to stay at the hospital is up to the attending physician and whether or not they're going to issue what's called a notice of mental illness. So if they meet that threshold, that begins the county's involuntary commitment program process, ICP. And so an ICP investigator would go and interview the subject, interview the physician, interview the family members, and determine whether they think the person meets the legal threshold to go to a civil commitment hearing. And they have 5 business days to make that determination. After the 3rd business day, if they decide the person meets that threshold, they'll set a hearing, and then on the 5th business day, unless there's some weird scheduling stuff, there'll be a hearing, and there'll be a panel of mental health experts as well as a judge to determine whether or not somebody meets that threshold. It's a really high bar, so the last time I looked at the stats, something like 94% of holds did not result in a civil commitment. So again, from our holds to an NMI, to an investigator deciding whether they're going to go to a hearing, to the hearing actually resulting in a civil commitment, 94% of those fall off before they reach that level.
And do you know, just a quick follow-up,
Yeah.
do you know how far along in that process he made it?
You know, I don't. He had 2 times that he was hospitalized, and I can't tell you in each of those cases where there's various places you can sort of divert. One is called a 14-day diversion, and there's a few other things. So I can't talk about the specifics of each of those cases, but yeah.
Ariel, solid point, 6 News
Yeah.
for you as well.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you did everything or your team did everything within the legal limits and the protocols,
Yeah.
right, that's set in place. But clearly, he needed a little bit more of an aggressive route attention. Is there maybe a call or a need to adjust the laws, adjust the protocols, so that when we do encounter something like this, we'll be a little bit more aggressive?
Yeah, well, I think what you're talking about is where the legal threshold for civil commitment is, and there's obviously been a lot of attention related to that. House Bill 2005, please fact check me on that, I think was trying to address that. And it's tricky because you are taking people who frequently haven't committed any crimes and you're depriving them of their civil liberty, you're in many cases locking them up, and so that bar should be really high. On the other hand, a feature of a lot of these mental illnesses is that you don't think you have a mental illness. And so to rely on voluntary engagement when a feature of the mental illness is you don't think you need help is really problematic as well. And so, yeah, the bar is really, really high, and, there's unintended consequences to that.
Did you guys find a note or anything, either at his house or anything to give reason why he took it this far?
Yeah, so we executed the search warrant yesterday at the residence, and a number of, Saturday, it's all blending together now. The units that were involved in that were our tactical team, our CERT team, as well as Sergeant Dufresne was there with the explosives disposal unit and other investigators. And the neighbors, he lives in a unit with roommates, and they were all very cooperative. His family's been very cooperative throughout the investigation. We didn't find a note or anything like there was no manifesto of any kind. There was evidence that proved that he had purchased the components necessary to build the devices that were used at the scene. There's quite a bit of evidence that he went to great pains to make sure that he purchased the components for the devices at multiple different locations to prevent any of the individual locations from realizing what was about to occur. So there was some intent behind that. Yeah.
Where do you guys go from here now, knowing what you guys know, finding all of these explosives? Like, what happens now? Is this case just closed, essentially? Because
Still an open investigation. We are pretty far along in the investigation. I think we're far enough along in it to make some definitive statements about the fact that I think that anybody who hears all these details will recognize that this was a lone actor. We still have to prove that that's the case, but I think we're there. We also have to make sure that there was no intent to do any domestic terrorism related stuff. And I think that we're there on, in the journey of trying to demonstrate that this was what it clearly is, which is that he was fixated on his former employer, and in an act of suicide, he intended to destroy that building. There doesn't appear to be any intent to have done anything further than that.
I have a couple questions. I'm all with KGW News. First, wanted to hear more about the extent of the damage, and I think that from Saturday there was still a question of like how many explosives were recovered. So just curious about that, and then I have a follow-up question more about mental health.
Well, I'll answer a portion of that, and I'm going to turn it over to Sergeant Dufresne to answer some more detailed stuff. I think that Mike Benner is going to be releasing some photos that will help answer in detail what the extent of the damage inside of the building were. I can just tell you, I can paint a picture in words, but you're going to get the picture, so you can just sort of look at that. But there's damage to the structure above where the vehicle was. Just obviously there was a fire, and the fire goes up, so there's some fire damage from that. There's some internal sort of facial damage to the interior of where the partial detonation occurred, and or I should say that the detonation. So to answer your question about what went off, and I'll just give you a primer, and I'll turn it over to Sergeant Dufresne to get into the greater detail. There were there were 20 propane tanks. None of those propane tanks detonated, fortunately. That's a lot of 5-pound propane tanks, right? That's a tremendous. If you visualize what 20 propane tanks look like, I don't think I could fit those in my car. So he also had, we think, about 10 improvised explosive devices. I say we think about 10 because some of them did detonate, and that creates debris that sort of becomes difficult to put the puzzle back together again. But again, Sergeant Dufresne can answer the questions about how that was determined. And then there was an amount of something we call a binary powder. That's two different powders that get mixed together to make an explosive powder that have to be triggered by an external force. So I'm out of my depth talking about that, so I'll turn it over to Sergeant Dufresne for the rest of that.
I'll kind of go through what we found. And I guess what I'd really like to stress is how close this was, and how dangerous this was. A lot of times when we deal with these things, what happens is someone is very, very motivated, but they are not sophisticated enough to create something that is super effective. This gentleman was sophisticated. He was intelligent, and it is simply luck that we didn't have a much larger blast. The total explosive weight inside of the car was north of 30 pounds. And we believe that the explosions actually used up about 4 to 5 pounds of that. So had those correct situations occurred, that explosion would have been fivefold of what it was. In addition, our public safety folks, the firefighters went in there and they did what firefighters do, and everything's in a vacuum. Everything we know now, we knew nothing. So the firefighters began to pull the propane tanks out, and one of the firefighters opened up a door, and a partially detonated pipe bomb fell at his feet. And so it is just luck sometimes, and what we had that kept some of these folks from getting hurt or a much bigger tragedy is simply luck. What we found inside the car were, as Commander Crooker said, about 5 to 6 partially detonated or fully detonated IEDs. These were generally steel pipe bombs filled with smokeless powder, which is very common. We recovered 2 or 3 live devices from the scene that were in different stages of detonating. And these things, bombs want to explode. And so it's incumbent on us to be wildly careful with those things. We took them out to a separate location, and when we began to RSP one of them, it low order exploded and started a fire. And so this is just, we were very close. I just think it's important to recognize how close this was to a real tragedy and how lucky we are that it wasn't. There was about 25 pounds of, as Commander Crooker said, we call it a binary explosive. People use it, they mix these two things together, and then they shoot them. A lot of times they're rifle sensitive. Had that gone off, that's a very, very large explosion. We took that out this morning. And just to be clear, we have been working since 3 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, and we are still working. The FBI was out at these locations yesterday, tracking and getting like video of him buying these things, just so we could, whoops, I'm sorry, move my hands too much, but just so we could be sure that it was just him. And honestly, if we thought it was anything but him, I wouldn't be here talking to you. We'd be looking for people. So I just want people to understand that also.
Colin, do you have a follow-up for us?
Yeah,
We got a
yeah.
couple more, and I got to get these individuals out.
I
Yeah,
have a super quick follow-up, but I did want to ask, you mentioned, Sergeant Silverman, just kind of going through the 2021 to now, like February 2026. After that point, you mentioned you had roommates. Was there any indication between that time and now that something was amiss? Like once he got out of the hospital, was there any contact from those folks with police or with your unit?
I can give you a high-level view, but then I can't get into the specifics, which is we have a officer and mental health clinician team that we're engaged both with him as well as family members. And something we do is we call it putting in tripwires. There's some ironic turn of phrase considering what happened, but that's sort of what we use in threat assessment, where we talk to family members to say, hey, this person is now out of the hospital. It doesn't mean they are cured by any stretch, and so if it crosses this threshold, give me a call. If it crosses this threshold, you call 911, and being really clear with folks in this person's world of when to contact us. So we did have that in place. Okay.
Before the next question, I just want to, does anyone have a question for Chief Day? I know he has a harder stop than the others in the room. Or we cut?
First and last name from it, so.
Oh, yeah, I mean, Bob Day, yeah, Chief, so. Oh, no, Chief Scott, do you have a question for Chief?
I just needed to know his name.
Oh, no, we can keep going for a couple more minutes. I just want to get, ask if anyone, okay, Chief, you were.
You hurt my feelings.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bring all the fun.
All right. We do have, they have somewhere to be too, so we have about 5 more minutes max. So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, Amanda Arden with CBSC's for Mr. Dufresne. Can I follow up? You mentioned we're extremely lucky this wasn't worse. Like, can you give us a sense of how bad this could have been? Could it have been the entire building? Could it have been a park block, nearby residences?
I don't think it would be an entire building. That's a pretty sturdy building. You would have had probably some pretty significant structural damage had that gone off. If the gas was on and you find the right, there was a couple explosions right at the beginning and then kind of a flashover from the propane. And so if you get just the right amount of propane mixture in the air, you could have a really significant fire. You can have a really significant flash. And then if you have gas lines close by, you know, I don't want to over dramatize it, but it could have been pretty significant, yeah.
Conrad?
So with the propane tanks, were they like kind of being thrown out of the vehicle around the floor? Were they all inside the vehicle?
They were packed inside the vehicle along with the bombs, yeah.
Question for Sergeant Silverman. Isabel Bump from the Oregonian. Can you walk us through circumstances around your first interaction with Mr. Whitman and kind of the timeline of his mental decomposition?
I don't have the specifics in front of us. I know pretty detailed police reports were written, and I have a feeling you can access them that way.
Quick follow-up to that. Do you
Yeah.
have
To know what date in February he was released from the hospital?
Of 2026? No.
Sergeant Crane and Quicker, did you find any explosives in his house? And also, when did he start going to purchase the components for the explosives based on the investigation?
Our understanding of the purchases, we found receipts and packaging material. We didn't find any additional explosive mixture at the house. We believe that around the 29th of April is when he started collecting items to do that.
And can you, or someone, one of you, talk about the limits of the red flag extreme risk? That removes guns, but it obviously here allows someone to put together explosives.
Yeah, the ERPO, Extreme Risk Protection Order, sometimes called a red flag law or yellow flag law. It's kind of like a gun restraining order, and so we are able to petition the court to restrict someone's firearms access when they pose some sort of significant danger, and there's some sort of dangerous weapon, deadly weapon or firearms nexus to it. The reason this law can be really useful in these cases is in mental health cases where we're using the civil commitment process, it requires some sort of need for immediate or imminent care, imminent or immediate dangerousness. So that like time horizon is very short, where for a red flag law or an ERPO, the risk is that they pose a significant danger in the near future. So that word in the near future versus immediate or imminent gives us some latitude, which is why it works, why we could say we could get this red flag law to prohibit firearms, but we couldn't, for example, hospitalize him based on that time horizon. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but there's no like restriction if you were to go to somewhere to purchase components for an explosive. There's no restriction on that.
Not like you, and it has nothing to do with explosives, but I don't know when you want to purchase explosive components.
No, in a nutshell, there's a firearm prohibition, but no.
Just wanted to ask too about the, when this happened. It appears that this man was leaning to himself, but just based on the timeline, I know he had circled the block maybe a few times before crashing into the building. Is there any indication in your investigation that he didn't want to hurt others or just take the building out for lack of better term?
We don't have anything to indicate that one way or another. I think that it's indicative that he went there at 3:30 in the morning. But we also have to recognize there are people in that building. One of the people that called was inside the building when the car came through, and they were there when the fire started. So it wasn't full, but certainly there's employees, and they've all been traumatized by this.
This is it right here, these final three. Ariel,
I have a
Isabel, and
two-parter.
Michelle.
First question, I know that the MAC had sent out letters to members about Bruce. Did they ever try to charge him with anything to keep him away from the property? I know we mentioned like stalking orders, et cetera, but was that like from the MAC to keep him away?
And Josh, stop me if I'm wrong. There's been a bunch of police interactions, but no, he was not arrested, is my understanding for.
Was there any like grounds for that since he was harassing, employees and members according to the letters?
Yeah, I can talk in sort of general terms that I know we discuss with the district attorney's office. Frequently we'll have conversations to decide what is going to be the most impactful intervention. Do we think a criminal justice intervention versus a civil commitment intervention if we're going to do something that doesn't have somebody's full buy-in on that? And so I do know that the case officer spoke with the district attorney's office about some of the behaviors, and we decided to go the civil commitment route rather than the law enforcement route. And even then, figuring out what crimes you have, most of these crimes aren't going to keep somebody in custody long term. And so what is a sort of a long-term threat mitigation strategy? So ultimately, after consulting with the district attorney's office, we decided to not file any charges.
And my second question, do we need to talk about the chickens? Like, was that related to him? I mean, we've heard from people saying that like he released chickens before this happened. Did you guys find that in your investigation as well?
I'll speak to it. It's everybody knows the chicken story. There was a chicken cage in his room with no chickens in it, and so it would be safe to assume that those chickens at Keller were his chickens.
And you've done that before?
He did it like 11 or 12 years ago as kind of a little prank, and so it's a strange coincidence for it to happen the day before.
Final two questions right here, and then we got a wrap. Isabel?
Can you clarify the timeline of when he was employed at the MAC and when he was fired?
That's not our place. You'll have to reach out to the MAC for that. And Ariel?
The shopping for these materials, did he do this locally? Did he buy them on Amazon? Did he go to multiple stores, or did he buy them all at one place? And if so, would that become a red flag for him if he's buying 20 per?
I can tell you personally that if I go for training and try to buy multiple pipes, they won't let me buy them, and I'm a policeman. He went to multiple locations in a short period of time and bought a little bit at those multiple locations. I believe, like I said, he was an intelligent person, and that to keep him from being looked at.
Is that all in Portland?
No.
All right. And to end it there, really appreciate everyone coming today, and again, the patience over the last couple of days. I know after we spoke Saturday, everyone wanted a lot, but we had to let this breathe a little bit and give our investigators time to wrap their head around this. So again, thank you very much and have a good rest of your day.